Imagine, if you will, a world that exists only in the deepest, most primal corners of our collective memory. A world where the horizon is not defined by skyscrapers or the hum of electricity, but by the jagged, frost-bitten peaks of mountains that have never known the touch of a mapmaker. It is 30,000 years ago. The Great Ice Age is not a historical era to the people living through it. It is the absolute, unchanging reality of existence. The air is so cold it feels like shattered glass in your lungs, and the wind carries the scent of pine resin, dried blood, and the musk of giants. Here, in the twilight of the Pleistocene, humanity is a fragile flame flickering in a vast, predatory darkness. We were not the masters of the earth back then. We were scavengers, opportunists, and clever survivors huddled around small fires, looking out into the swaying shadows of the forest with eyes wide with terror and wonder. And in those shadows, something was watching us. Not with the hunger of a lion or the mindless rage of a cave bear, but with a cold, calculating curiosity. These were the wolves of the old world, massive, leggy, and incredibly intelligent. This is where our story begins, not in a laboratory and not in the warmth of a modern living room, but in the blood and bone reality of the Stone Age. It is the story of how two of the most successful predators on the planet decided to stop killing each other and start a partnership that would change the course of planetary history forever. Did Stone Age people have pets? The word pet feels too small, too trivial for what actually happened. They didn't just have animals they kept for fun. They forged a biological and spiritual soul bond with the wild. Before we dive deep into the frozen mud of the past to find the first paw prints alongside human footprints, I want to ask you something. Look at the dog sleeping on your rug right now, or the one you saw at the park today. Do you see the wolf still hiding behind those puppy dog eyes? If you were suddenly transported back 30,000 years into the freezing wilderness, do you think your current dog would be the one protecting you from a saber-toothed cat? Or would you both be in a lot of trouble? Tell me your dog's name in the comments and let me know, is your furry friend a fierce Ice Age survivor or a spoiled modern aristocrat? I'll be reading through your answers to see which breeds you think would have made the best prehistoric partners. To understand the origin of the dog, we have to understand the wolf of the late Pleistocene. These weren't exactly like the grey wolves we see in Yellowstone or the forests of Siberia today. They were a distinct lineage, often referred to as Megafaunal wolves. They were built for the extreme. Their jaws were wider, their teeth thicker, designed for crushing the bones of reindeer, wild horses, and perhaps even scavenging the carcasses of mammoths. They lived in a world of giants, and they had to be tough to survive. But something was changing. The climate was oscillating, creating a high-pressure environment where every calorie counted. At the same time, a new kind of ape was spreading across the landscape, Homo sapiens. We were strange creatures, physically weak compared to the great cats, slow compared to the deer, but we had two things that made us the most dangerous presence on the tundra: fire and cooperation. The traditional story we've been told for decades is that a brave Stone Age hunter found a litter of wolf pups, took them back to the camp, and raised them. It's a nice, heartwarming image, a caveman cradling a fuzzy ball of fur. But modern science suggests the truth is far more complex and much more interesting. It wasn't a one-sided kidnapping. It was a slow, multi-generational dance of mutual interest. Think about the camp of a group of Paleolithic hunters. It would have been a beacon in the dark. It smelled of roasting meat, it provided warmth, and most importantly, it produced waste. For a wolf living on the edge of starvation, the trash of a human camp, the discarded bones, the scraps of hide, the gristle, was a gold mine. But only the bravest, or perhaps the most chill, wolves would dare to get close. The high-strung, aggressive wolves would stay far away, snarling in the darkness. But the individuals with a slightly lower flight distance, those with a naturally calmer temperament, began to hang around the periphery. They became the camp followers. This was the birth of self-domestication. Over hundreds of years, these calmer wolves began to separate themselves from their wilder kin. They weren't being "5" by humans yet. They were taming themselves to fit a new ecological niche, the human shadow. They became the cleanup crew. And for the humans, having these proto-wolves around was an incredible advantage. Imagine you're a mother sleeping in a shallow cave or a tent made of skins. The night is pitch black. You can't see the cave lion creeping through the tall grass. But the wolves can. They hear the snap of a twig. They smell the feline musk. They start to growl, to bark, a sound that was likely much rarer in the wild but became a vital alarm system for the human camp. The humans realized that as long as these ___6__ were nearby, they were safer. A deal was struck, written in the language of survival. We provide the food scraps, you provide the ears and the warning. As we move deeper into this narrative, we see the physical transformation begin. When you breed for tameness, strange things happen to the body. This is known as "7." In a famous experiment in the 1950s with silver foxes, scientists found that by selecting only for tameness, the animals started to change physically within just a few generations. Their coats developed white patches, their tails began to curl, and their ears became floppy. Their snouts shortened. Why? Because the chemicals in the brain that control fear and aggression, like adrenaline, are linked to the cells that determine physical pigments and skeletal structure. The Stone Age proto-dogs were undergoing a radical biological makeover. Their brains were literally shrinking in the areas dedicated to "8" because they no longer needed to be on high alert every second of the day. They were becoming "9" long before we had a word for it. But it wasn't just a biological shift, it was a shift in the way humans perceived the world. In the deep Paleolithic, the line between human and animal was much thinner than it is today. Many indigenous cultures even now view animals as other nations, different peoples with their own languages and spirits. To the Stone Age hunter, the wolf was not a pet to be owned, but a powerful ally to be respected. We see this in the archaeological record. In places like the Goyer Cave in Belgium or the Predmosty site in the Czech Republic, researchers have found skulls of canids that are clearly different from wild wolves. They have shorter muzzles and crowded teeth, the first signs of the transition. and some of these skulls were found in contexts that suggest ritual. In one instance, a dog skull was found with a large bone inserted into its mouth after death, perhaps a final meal for the journey into the afterlife. This tells us that by the height of the Ice Age, the relationship had moved far beyond trash eater and alarm system. These animals were being mourned. They were being integrated into the human spiritual world. Think about the sheer practical power of this alliance. Before the dog, a human hunter had to rely on their own limited senses. We have terrible noses and mediocre hearing. But with a proto-dog, the human hunter suddenly gained the olfactory power of a god. They could track a wounded reindeer for miles through a blizzard. They could find hidden burrows. They could hold large prey at bay while the humans moved in with spears. It is no coincidence that after the domestication of the dog, Homo sapiens began to thrive even more aggressively, eventually becoming the only human species left on Earth. While the Neanderthals were disappearing, we were walking into the future with our new best friends at our heels. Some scientists even argue that the dog gave us the competitive edge that allowed us to outlast the Neanderthals. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party, strong, brave, but limited to what him worse. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party, strong, brave, but limited to what him worse. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party, but even billed to potentially know that they were. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party was organized, but they were learn from so grated. The word and any coepsitute the dog was just by the results that a clarity prey and insight for dog. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party was organized, but they were learn from so grated. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party was just by the results that a clarity prey and insight for dog. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party was organized, but they were learn from so grated. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party was just by the results that a clarity prey and insight for dog. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party was just by the results that a clarity prey and insight for dog. Imagine a Neanderthal hunting party was just by the results that a clarity prey and insight for dog, but limited to what they could see. Now imagine a Homo sapiens party preceded by a pack of highly trained, scent-driven canines. It wasn't even a fair fight. The story of the first dogs is also a story of migration. As humans moved across the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas, the dogs went with them. As we moved into the burning deserts of Australia and the dense jungles of the Amazon, the dogs were there. They adapted as we adapted. Their coats changed, their sizes shifted, but the fundamental contract remained. It is perhaps the most successful biological merger in the history of life. Two different orders of mammals, primates and carnivora, merging their destinies so completely that today many humans feel more of an emotional connection to their dogs than to their own neighbors. But what was it like on a Tuesday afternoon 25,000 years ago to live with a dog? Let's put ourselves in the boots of a young girl in a tribe roaming the mammoth steppe. She doesn't call it a dog. Maybe she calls it brother, or the one who hears the wind. She has grown up with this creature. They slept together for warmth on nights so cold that the trees exploded from the frost. She has felt the rough tongue of the wolf dog on her hand, a gesture of submission and affection that predates human speech. When the tribe moves, the dog helps carry the load, perhaps pulling a simple travois made of poles and skin. When she is lonely or scared, she whispers her secrets into its fur. In a world where every other living thing wants to eat you or run away from you, this animal stays. This animal chooses you. That is the fundamental miracle of the dog. It is a choice. A wild animal looked at the most dangerous predator on earth, the human, and said, "I will go where you go." As we explore the genetic evidence, the plot thickens. For a long time, there was a fierce debate. Where did the first dog come from? Was it Europe, the Middle East, East Asia? For a while, geneticists were pointing fingers in every direction. Recent studies, however, suggest something even more fascinating. It's possible that dogs were domesticated not once, but twice, in two different parts of the world, and then these populations eventually met and merged. Or, perhaps more likely, there was one single ancient source in North-Central Asia or Siberia that spread out like a fan. The DNA of ancient dogs found in places like the Bonn-Oberkassel site in Germany shows a deep, long-standing connection to their human companions. At that site, which dates back about 14,000 years, a dog was buried alongside a man and a woman. The dog was young and had been sick with distemper for many weeks before it died. It couldn't have survived on its own. The only reason that dog lived as long as it did was because the humans cared for it. They cleaned it, gave it water, and kept it warm. They didn't gain anything useful from a sick puppy. They did it out of love. This is the first definitive proof of the pet relationship, the moment where utility was replaced by empathy. The discovery of the Bonn-Oberkassel puppy is a profound turning point in our understanding of our own humanity. It forces us to ask a difficult question. Did we domesticate the dog, or did the dog domesticate us? When those ancient humans spent their precious energy and time caring for a sick, useless animal, they were acting against the cold, hard logic of Darwinian survival. Or so it seems at first glance. But nature plays a long game, and the biological wiring that prompted those Ice Age humans to nurse a dying pup was part of an evolutionary masterstroke. This is where the story shifts from archaeology to neuroscience, because the bond between Stone Age people and their new canine companions wasn't just built on shared meat and mutual defense. It was forged in the deepest, most ancient chemical pathways of the mammalian brain. To understand this invisible leash that binds us, we have to look at the eyes. If you stare directly into the eyes of a wild wolf, you are issuing a challenge. In the wild canid world, a hard, direct stare is a precursor to violence. It means, quote 22 or quote 23, a subordinate wolf will avert its gaze to keep the peace. But a dog? A dog looks at you. It seeks your eyes out. It stares at you across the living room, across the park, and across the millennia. How did this happen? Over thousands of years, as those proto-dogs hung around the edges of human camps, they realized something crucial about these strange Upright apes. We humans are incredibly visual creatures. We communicate volumes through our eye contact. The dogs that figured out how to look us in the eye without triggering an aggressive response were the ones that got tossed the extra bone. But it goes deeper than just a learned behavior. Modern science has discovered a literal quote _24_ that exists only between humans and dogs. When a dog and a human look into each other's eyes, both of their brains release a surge of oxytocin. Oxytocin is often called the cuddle hormone or the love hormone. It's the exact same chemical that floods a mother's brain when she looks at her newborn baby, creating an intense, unbreakable bond of care and affection. No other animal on Earth can trigger this specific maternal oxytocin loop in humans. The early dogs, entirely by accident, hijacked the human maternal instinct. They hacked our biology. When a Stone Age hunter looked down at a shivering proto-dog pup, and the pup looked back, the hunter's brain flooded with the same chemical that made him love his own children. Suddenly, this wasn't just a useful alarm system or a scavenging camp follower, this was family. And the physical adaptations followed this emotional hack in spectacular fashion. Have you ever wondered why your dog can give you that pathetic, soulful look that makes you forgive them for chewing up your shoes? It's all in the eyebrows. Scientists recently discovered that over the course of thousands of years of domestication, dogs developed a specific muscle that wolves almost entirely lack. It's called the levator anguli oculi medialis. Its sole function is to raise the inner eyebrow. When a dog uses this muscle, it makes their eyes look larger, rounder, and more infant-like. It creates an expression that mimics human sadness. When we see a dog do this, it triggers an overwhelming urge in us to nurture and protect them. Stone Age people, huddled around their fires in the freezing dark, were completely defenseless against this evolutionary magic trick. They didn't stand a chance. The dogs evolved the physical tools to make us love them, and in doing so, they secured the ultimate survival strategy: having the apex predator of the planet treat them like children. As this profound chemical and emotional bond solidified, the very landscape of the world was beginning to shift. Around 12 to 15,000 years ago, the grip of the Ice Age started to loosen. The massive glaciers that had covered much of the northern hemisphere began to retreat, weeping colossal rivers of meltwater into the oceans. The vast, open mammoth steppes, the endless plains of grass and low shrubs, started to disappear, replaced by spreading, dense forests of birch, pine, and eventually oak. The world was warming up, and the cast of characters was changing. The giants were dying. The woolly mammoths, the cave bears, the saber-toothed cats, they were fading into the twilight of extinction, unable to adapt to the changing climate and the relentless pressure of human hunters. For the human tribes, this environmental upheaval was a crisis. The hunting strategies that had worked for thousands of years on the open steppe were suddenly useless in a dense, dark forest. You cannot throw a spear 100 yards when there are 1,000 trees in the way. The game was getting smaller, faster, and much harder to find. Red deer, wild boar, and roe deer were masters of hiding in the thick underbrush. Human eyesight, which was so effective on the open plains, was suddenly limited to just a few dozen feet. We were effectively blind in this new green world. If we had faced this challenge alone, humanity might have experienced a catastrophic population collapse. But we weren't alone. We had the dog. And the dog possessed exactly what we lacked: the ultimate sensory apparatus for navigating a closed environment. Let's take a moment to truly appreciate the sheer, terrifying power of the canine nose. A human has roughly 5 to 6 million olfactory receptors in our nasal cavity. A dog can have up to 300 million. The part of a dog's brain that is dedicated to analyzing smells is proportionally 40 times larger than ours. If human smell is equivalent to catching a brief glimpse of a single word on a page, a dog's sense of smell is reading the entire encyclopedia in the dark from a mile away. They don't just smell the air, they see the world through a complex, multi-layered topography of scent. A dog walking through a forest can smell that a fox passed by this specific tree 3 hours ago. They can smell fear in the sweat of a hiding deer. They can smell a drop of blood buried under a foot of snow. In the dense post-glacial forests, the dog became the human's radar. Picture a hunting party moving through a thick European woodland 10,000 years ago. The humans are moving silently, spears at the ready, but they are following the lead of their dogs. The dogs are sweeping the area, noses to the earth, reading the invisible trails of prey. Suddenly, a dog freezes. Its ears prick forward. It gives a low, rumbling growl, or perhaps a sharp, staccato bark, a sound that, unlike wolves, adult dogs retain precisely to communicate with us. The humans fan out. The dogs flush a wild boar from the thicket, chasing it, nipping at its heels, using their speed and agility to herd the massive, dangerous beast into an ambush where the human hunters are waiting with spears. This was the birth of a biological superorganism. The human-dog hunting team was exponentially more lethal and efficient than either species operating alone. The humans provided the strategy, the ranged weapons, and the killing blow. The dogs provided the speed, the tracking, and the ability to hold dangerous prey at bay. This synergy allowed our ancestors to thrive in a rapidly changing world. The dogs ensured we didn't starve when the mammoths vanished. They were our bridge from the Ice Age to the modern world. As humanity spread and adapted to wildly different environments, our canine partners warped and shifted alongside us. This wasn't modern purebred dog breeding with pedigrees and dog shows. This was brutal, functional evolution driven by absolute necessity. The dogs that couldn't perform their jobs didn't survive, and they didn't pass on their genes. Slowly, in different pockets of the world, specialized proto-breeds began to emerge. Far to the north, in the brutal, unforgiving deep freeze of the Siberian Arctic, we find one of the most astonishing examples of this specialization. On a remote spit of frozen earth called Zhukov Island, archaeologists uncovered a settlement dating back roughly 9,000 years. The people who lived there were completely isolated in a world of ice and polar bears. And they had dogs. But these weren't just any dogs. These were highly specialized machines of endurance and cold weather survival. By analyzing the bones, scientists discovered that the Zhukov Island dogs were precisely the size and build of modern Siberian Huskies and Alaskan Malamutes. They weren't bred for hunting, and they certainly weren't bred to sit on a lap. They were bred for one specific purpose: pulling. The people of Zhukov Island had invented the dog sled. Think about the technological leap this represents. In a landscape covered in deep snow and ice, human mobility is agonizingly slow. Carrying a heavy load of seal meat or ivory back to a camp is backbreaking, dangerous work. But by harnessing the power of a team of dogs, these ancient Siberians effectively conquered the Arctic. They could travel vast distances, haul massive loads, and communicate between distant outposts. The sled dog was the snowmobile of the Stone Age, a piece of living technology that made human life possible in the most hostile environment on Earth. And the evidence shows that the humans of Zhukov Island were incredibly careful about their breeding. They selectively bred for a very specific size, big enough to pull heavy loads, but small enough that they wouldn't consume too much precious meat. It was an astonishing display of prehistoric genetic engineering. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the sweltering heat of the Middle East, a completely different type of dog was taking shape. Here, the landscape was vast, open deserts and plains. The prey wasn't hiding in forests or buried under snow. It was running fast over hard ground. Gazelles and hares were the targets. The thick coats and heavy bones of the Arctic dogs would be a death sentence here. Instead, the humans in the Middle East partnered with and slowly shaped dogs built for explosive speed and phenomenal eyesight. These were the ancestors of the Salukis and Afghan hounds, long-legged, deep-chested, aerodynamic marvels capable of running down prey that humans couldn't even keep in their line of sight. They didn't track by smell, they hunted by sight, chasing down the fastest animals on the plains and holding them until the human hunters arrived. And in other parts of the world, early farming communities were beginning to take root. As humans transitioned from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled agriculturalists, the role of the dog shifted yet again. We were accumulating wealth, stores of grain, herds of domesticated sheep and goats, and wealth attracts thieves, both animal and human. The hunters became guards. The early agriculturalists needed dogs that were massive, intimidating, and fiercely territorial. They needed dogs that would stand their ground against a pack of wolves or a raiding party of rival humans. These were the ancestors of the mastiffs and livestock guardian dogs we see today. In every corner of the globe, the dog became the key that unlocked human potential. But it wasn't just a physical partnership. As our societies grew more complex, as we developed religion, mythology, and art, the dog occupied a unique and sacred space in our collective psyche. They walked with us in life, and almost every ancient culture believed they walked with us in death. Across wildly different, unconnected cultures, a fascinating, recurring theme emerges. The dog as the guardian of the underworld, the psychopomp, the guide for human souls transitioning to the afterlife. In ancient Egypt, Anubis, the god of mummification and the afterlife, had the head of a jackal or a wild dog. In Greek mythology, the terrifying three-headed dog Cerberus guarded the gates of Hades to prevent the dead from leaving. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs believed that the Xoloitzcuintli, a hairless breed of dog, was explicitly created by the gods to guide the souls of the dead through the perilous journey of Mictlan, the underworld. In Norse mythology, the blood-soaked hound Garma guards the gates of hell. Why this universal connection between dogs and death? Perhaps it stems from their origins as scavengers, animals that lingered around the edges of our camps and occasionally fed on the dead. But it's likely something deeper, something rooted in the psychology of that ancient bond. The dog was the ultimate protector in the waking world. It stood between the human and the terrors of the dark. It warned of approaching danger. It offered warmth and comfort. When a human faced the ultimate, terrifying unknown of death, what better companion to imagine at their side than the one creature that had never abandoned them in life? If a dog would fight a cave bear for you in the physical world, surely its spirit would fight off the demons of the next world. The graves of the Stone Age confirm this spiritual reverence. We don't just find dogs buried in trash pits, discarded like broken tools. We find them carefully laid to rest. In a staggering 8,000-year-old burial site in modern-day Sweden, archaeologists uncovered the grave of a dog buried with more wealth and ceremony than most humans of the time. The dog was laid on its side, surrounded by precious flint tools, a decorated bone hammer, and covered in red ochre, a sacred pigment used universally in ancient human burials to symbolize blood and life. This wasn't a pet, this was a warrior, a respected member of the tribe who was being given a hero's send-off. Imagine the scene at that burial. The flickering light of torches reflecting off the snow, the rhythmic chanting of the tribe, the shaman stepping forward to sprinkle the red powder over the stiff, cold body of the great hunter. The humans mourning not for a beast, but for a friend, a brother in arms. They are equipping him for his final hunt in the stars. This deep, resonant grief tells us everything we need to know about what the dog meant to Stone Age people. It was a relationship built on equal parts utility and profound, soul-deep affection. As we stand at the edge of the Neolithic Revolution, watching the ice retreat and the first seeds being intentionally planted, the story of the dog takes an even more astonishing turn. The bond forged in the freezing darkness of the Pleistocene was about to be weaponized for a new kind of survival. We often talk about how humans domesticated dogs, but a growing number of anthropologists and neuroscientists are beginning to ask a much more radical question. Did the dog domesticate us? Did having this hyper-vigilant, ultra-loyal predator sleeping at our feet fundamentally change the trajectory of human evolution? To understand this, we have to think about sleep. In the wild, sleep is a profound vulnerability. For a prehistoric human living without walls, every time you closed your eyes, you were rolling the dice with your life. A cave lion, a pack of hyenas, or a rival human tribe could end your existence in a heartbeat. Because of this, early humans, much like modern chimpanzees, likely slept in relatively light, fragmented stages. They had to be ready to wake up and fight or flee at the snap of a twig. But then the dog entered the camp. The gift of deep sleep. With dogs acting as the ultimate biological early warning system, the calculus of human vulnerability completely changed. The proto-dog possessed hearing and smell that eclipsed our own by orders of magnitude. A human could finally close their eyes and know that an alarm would sound long before a predator reached the firelight. This allowed Homo sapiens to do something extraordinary. We could sleep deeply. We could slip into prolonged periods of REM, rapid eye movement sleep. Why does this matter? REM sleep is the crucible of the mind. It is during deep sleep that the brain consolidates memories, solves complex problems, and engages in the intense neural wiring that sparks creativity and innovation. Some evolutionary biologists theorize that the security provided by our canine companions allowed human brains to rest, repair, and dream in ways that our hominid ancestors never could. The dog literally gave us the peace of mind necessary to imagine the modern world. We didn't just share our food with them, they gave us the gift of uninterrupted thought. The next time you see your dog twitching and running in their sleep, dreaming their own ancient grassy dreams, remember that their ancestors' vigilance is what allowed your ancestors to dream at all. The herding revolution. As the climate warmed and humanity began to experiment with keeping herds of sheep, goats, and cattle, the dog's role had to undergo a drastic psychological rewiring. The hunting dog of the Ice Age had a simple, linear job: track the prey, chase the prey, hold or kill the prey. This is the fundamental sequence of the predatory sequence: eye, stalk, chase, grab, kill. But a farmer doesn't want their dog to kill the sheep. A dead sheep is a loss of wealth, milk, and wool. The early farmers needed a miracle. They needed a predator that could retain the intense drive to stalk and chase, but magically turn off the desire to grab and kill. Through relentless, highly selective breeding, often over hundreds of generations, these early agriculturalists managed to fragment the dog's predatory sequence. Think about the sheer, mind-bending complexity of a modern herding dog like a border collie whose ancestors were shaped in these early pastoral communities. They used the intense predatory quote 27 of a wolf stalking a caribou, but instead of using it to initiate a lethal attack, they use it to intimidate and steer a flock of sheep. They tap into the ancient, adrenaline-fueled joy of the chase, but they inhibit their own jaws. They become the ultimate managers of movement. This transition from hunter to herder is arguably the greatest psychological modification we have ever achieved with another species. Stone Age and early Bronze Age humans transformed a solitary, lethal hunter into a sophisticated, highly disciplined extension of the human will. Without the herding dog, large-scale agriculture in harsh, open environments would have been nearly impossible. A single human cannot keep a flock of 200 sheep safe from wolves and prevent them from scattering across miles of rough terrain. But one human and two well-trained dogs? They act as a mobile, impenetrable fence. The dogs became the shepherds of human civilization, guarding the very food supply that allowed cities to eventually rise. The Great Migration. Dogs in the Americas. The story of the first dogs is a global epic, and perhaps its most dramatic chapter is the journey into the New World. For decades, a fierce debate raged among archaeologists. When the first human pioneers crossed the Bering Land Bridge, a massive frozen causeway connecting Siberia to Alaska, did they cross alone, or did they bring their dogs? Modern genetic mapping has given us the answer, and it is a resounding, thrilling yes. The first Americans did not conquer the pristine, terrifying wilderness of the Ice Age Americas alone. They walked alongside their dogs. In fact, ancient DNA extracted from fossilized dog remains in the Americas shows that these pre-Columbian dogs were directly descended from those ancient Siberian lineages. Imagine that crossing, a brutal, howling landscape of ice and wind. Colossal, short-faced bears, predators twice the size of modern grizzlies, roamed the frozen plains, alongside massive dire wolves and saber-toothed cats. The humans who made this journey were the ultimate survivors, but they relied heavily on their dogs. These dogs helped pull their meager belongings, sniffed out seal breathing holes in the ice, and stood between the tiny, fragile human families and the nightmare predators of the Pleistocene Americas. As humans spread south, rapidly populating North, Central, and South America, their dogs diversified with them. They created a staggering variety of breeds uniquely adapted to the new continents. There were massive, woolly dogs kept by the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, whose hair was actually sheared and woven into thick, warm blankets, the dog literally becoming the source of human clothing. There were tiny, agile dogs in Mesoamerica, but the story of the ancient American dogs is also a story of immense tragedy. When European colonizers arrived in the Americas at the end of the 15th century, they brought their own dogs with them, mastiffs and bloodhounds bred for war and intimidation. More devastatingly, they brought European diseases. Just as the indigenous human populations were decimated by smallpox and measles, the indigenous dog populations were virtually wiped out by European canine diseases to which they had no immunity. Combined with a systematic cultural erasure by the colonizers, who viewed the native dogs as inferior, or quote, 28 For a long time, scientists believed that the ancient pre-Columbian dog lineages were completely extinct, wiped off the face of the earth by colonization. But nature has a way of hiding its ghosts. In recent decades, geneticists testing the DNA of free-roaming feral dogs in the isolated swamps and pine forests of the American South made a stunning discovery. A specific type of wild dog, known as the Carolina dog, or the quote, 29 carries distinct genetic markers that link them directly back to those ancient Asian ancestors that crossed the Bering Land Bridge. They survived. Hiding in the deep swamps, avoiding human contact for centuries, a tiny remnant of the Ice Age dogs that conquered the Americas still breeds, still hunts, and still carries the ancient blood of the first companions. Reading the unseen, the bizarre evidence of prehistoric love. How do we truly know the emotional depth of these ancient people? Stones and bones can only tell us so much. They give us the timeline and the anatomy, but they struggle to capture the affection, the frustration, and the daily reality of living with a prehistoric dog. To find the real texture of this relationship, archaeologists have had to look in some very unusual places. One of the most fascinating sources of information comes from paleofeces, fossilized human and animal droppings, also known as coprolites. It sounds deeply unglamorous, but to a scientist, ancient poop is a time capsule of diet and lifestyle. At the Heinz Cave site in Texas, which dates back over 9,000 years, researchers made a bizarre and touching discovery. By analyzing the coprolites found at the site, they could tell exactly what the humans were eating and exactly what the dogs were eating. In a purely practical, harsh survival scenario, a dog gets the absolute worst scraps. The bones, the gristle, the things humans simply cannot digest. But the Heinz Cave coprolites revealed something different. The dogs were eating fish, small mammals, and specific types of vegetation. But the chemical signatures showed that the humans were catching the fish, processing it, and intentionally feeding the high-quality, protein-rich meat to their dogs. They were sharing the prime cuts. Think about the effort required to catch a fish 9,000 years ago without modern nets or fishing lines. It took immense patience and skill. And when that hunter finally pulled a glistening fish from the river, they didn't consume it all themselves to maximize their own caloric intake. They looked at the panting, expectant animal sitting beside them and they shared it. This is not the behavior of an owner treating a tool. This is the behavior of a family member sharing a meal. Furthermore, the archaeological record is filled with evidence of veterinary care that defies evolutionary logic. We see dog skeletons with broken legs that have completely healed. A wild wolf with a shattered femur is a dead wolf. It cannot hunt, it becomes prey. The healing of a major bone takes weeks, sometimes months of absolute rest and constant provisioning of food and water. When we find a 10,000-year-old dog skeleton with a healed, previously shattered leg, we are looking at tangible, physical proof of human empathy. We are looking at a Stone Age human who built a splint, who carried water in a skin pouch to a crippled animal, who chewed up food to make it easier for the dog to swallow, and who defended that helpless creature from predators for months. Why? Because the bond had transcended utility. The dog was no longer just an alarm system or a hunting weapon. It was a being with a name, a personality, and a soul. The grief of losing that individual outweighed the immense burden of keeping it alive. The echoes of the wolf, the dark side of the bond. However, to paint this entire history as a heart-warming Disney movie would be to do a disservice to the brutal reality of the ancient world. The relationship between humans and early dogs was incredibly intimate, but it was also fraught with danger and primal fear. The shadow of the wolf never fully vanished, and early humans were acutely aware of the violent potential sleeping by their fires. This tension birthed a profound duality in human mythology and psychology that persists to this day. The dog was the protector, but the wild wolf, from which the dog came, became the ultimate symbol of the untamed, chaotic, and terrifying wilderness. The forest was dark, and the wolf was its avatar. This fear was rooted in very real, visceral dangers. Feral dogs, those that had lived near humans but slipped back into the wild, were incredibly dangerous. They knew human behavior. They lacked the natural fear of fire that wild wolves possessed. A pack of feral proto-dogs was arguably more dangerous to an isolated human camp than a pack of truly wild wolves. And then there was the ultimate terror, rabies. Long before we understood viruses or microbiology, ancient humans understood that sometimes a good dog goes mad. The sudden transformation of a loyal companion into a slavering, hyper-aggressive monster that bit its masters and condemned them to a horrific, agonizing death must have seemed like a demonic possession. The ancient Mesopotamians, one of the cradles of civilization emerging from the Stone Age, wrote incantations and laws specifically dealing with rabid dogs. It was a terror so profound that it left deep scars on our collective psyche, spawning the enduring myths of werewolves and shapeshifters, the horrifying realization that the beast we thought we had tamed still lurks just beneath the skin, ready to tear us apart. Yet, despite the fear, despite the danger of rabies, and despite the sheer caloric cost of feeding another apex predator, we never broke the contract. We never drove them away. The benefits, the companionship, the warmth, the hunting prowess, the deep soulful connection always outweighed the risks. As we look past the Stone Age and into the dawn of recorded history, we see the dog firmly established not just as a pet, but as an essential pillar of human society. The ancient Egyptians didn't just revere dogs. They built massive, dedicated catacombs where millions of dogs were mummified and buried, often serving as messengers to the gods. The ancient Greeks put spiked collars on their sheepdogs to protect their throats from wolves, a design so perfect that livestock guardian dogs in Turkey and Italy still wear nearly identical collars today. The Romans created the famous mosaic at Pompeii, depicting a fierce chained dog with the words, quote, 30, beware of the dog, the ancient ancestor of the very sign you might have on your front gate right now. But strip away the spiked collars, the mummification bandages, and the mosaic tiles, and the core reality remains unchanged. Underneath it all is that same shivering proto-wolf from the Pleistocene, looking up at a terrified, brilliant, naked ape, and deciding that they are better off together than apart. To truly grasp the magnitude of this prehistoric contract, we must fast forward through the millennia and look at what this relationship has become in the modern era. The journey from the smoky fires of the Ice Age to the climate-controlled comfort of our modern living rooms is perhaps the most bizarre and beautiful evolutionary trajectory on the planet. For tens of thousands of years, the dog was shaped primarily by function. Form followed survival. If a dog could not pull a sled, herd sheep, guard a camp, or track a wounded deer, its bloodline ended. Natural selection, guided by human hands, was a brutal, pragmatic sculptor. But as human civilization grew more secure, as we built walls of stone and steel, and as the dark wilderness was pushed further and further back from our doorsteps, a fundamental shift occurred in the way we interacted with our oldest friends. The dog began a slow, fascinating transition from a necessary tool of survival to a creature of pure companionship. This shift reached its absolute zenith in the Victorian era. Merely a blink of an eye ago in evolutionary terms. It was during the 19th century that humans, suddenly flush with the wealth and leisure time brought about by the Industrial Revolution, began to breed dogs not for what they could do, but for how they looked. This was the birth of the modern dog breed. The incredible genetic plasticity of the canine genome, a plasticity born of those thousands of years of human-directed evolution, was pushed to its absolute limits. We took the descendants of the mighty Pleistocene wolf and began to manipulate them like living clay. We bred dogs with legs as short as a ruler to send them down badger holes. We bred dogs with skin so loose it folded over their eyes to protect them from the tusks of wild boars. We bred giants the size of small ponies and toys small enough to fit inside a teacup. In a span of less than 200 years, human aesthetic whim created a diversity of physical forms within a single species that has no parallel in the entire history of biology. Yet, beneath the meticulously groomed coats of the poodle, behind the squished face of the pug, and within the trembling frame of the chihuahua, the ancient primal software still runs. The hardware has been radically altered, but the operating system remains deeply rooted in the Pleistocene. Have you ever watched your dog circle 3 or 4 times on a soft rug before finally lying down? They are not checking for comfort. They are acting out an ancient, hardwired instinct to trample down tall grass and drive out hidden snakes or scorpions before making a bed on the step. When a terrier furiously digs at the carpets in your living room, they are possessed by the ghosts of their ancestors excavating a rat's nest. When a hound throws its head back and bays at the sound of a passing ambulance siren, it is answering the howl of the pack across the vast, frozen tundra of time. We changed their bodies, but we could not erase the wild echoes trapped in their DNA. The true marvel of the modern dog, however, lies not in their varied shapes, but in the unseen architecture of their minds. In recent decades, cognitive scientists have begun to study dogs with the same rigorous methodologies used to study human infants and great apes. And the results have completely shattered our understanding of animal intelligence. For a long time, science dismissed dogs as simple learning machines, assuming their behavior was just a series of conditioned responses, tricks learned for treats. But modern research has proven that what the Stone Age hunters felt instinctively was absolutely scientifically true. Dogs understand us on a level that no other creature on Earth can even approach. Consider the pointing experiment. If you place a treat under one of two cups and point to the correct cup, a dog will instinctively look where you are pointing and find the food. This seems incredibly simple to us, but in the animal kingdom it is a cognitive superpower. If you try this exact same experiment with a chimpanzee, our closest living genetic relative, an animal with whom we share almost 99% of our DNA, the chimpanzee will just look at your finger. They do not understand the intention behind the gesture. They do not grasp that you are trying to share information with them. A dog, even a puppy at just a few weeks old, understands human pointing effortlessly. They are born genetically pre-wired to read human intention. They scan our faces, they track our eye movements, and they interpret our body language with a fluency that rivals our own. They evolved to be the ultimate readers of the human soul. This cognitive connection goes even deeper than body language. It extends into the very processing of sound and emotion. Neuroscientist Gregory Burns conducted a groundbreaking series of experiments where he trained awake, unrestrained dogs to voluntarily enter an fMRI machine so he could scan their brains. He wanted to see what happened inside a dog's mind when it smelled its owner or heard a human voice. The results were staggering. When a dog smells the familiar scent of its human, the caudate nucleus in its brain, the area associated with anticipated rewards and positive emotions, lights up like a fireworks display. This is the exact same region of the human brain that activates when we see pictures of people we love. Even more incredibly, Burns discovered that dogs possess a specialized voice area in their brains, located in a similar place to ours, that is specifically tuned to human vocal intonations. They don't just hear our words as noise. They actively process the emotional weight of our tone. When you speak to your dog in a happy voice, their brain lights up with joy. When you are sad, they register your distress. They are biologically tethered to our emotional states. This brings us to a profound philosophical realization. When we ask the question, did Stone Age people have pets? We are using a modern word that entirely fails to capture the gravity of the prehistoric reality. A pet is an accessory. A pet is something you keep for amusement. The first dogs were not pets. They were co-authors of the human story. We often like to think of human history as a solo achievement, a testament to our big brains, our opposable thumbs, and our unique capacity for language. We see ourselves as the lone conquerors of the natural world, pulling ourselves up from the mud by our own bootstraps. But this is a deeply flawed, arrogant narrative. We did not conquer the world alone. We had a co-pilot. The biological success of Homo sapiens is inextricably linked to the biological success of Canis familiaris. It is a symbiotic relationship so deep and so ancient that it blurs the line between two distinct species. We are, in many ways, a hybrid superorganism. We outsourced our vulnerability to them. By relying on their superior senses of smell and hearing, we freed up massive amounts of our own cognitive processing power. because we didn't have to devote every ounce of our energy to listening for approaching predators in the dark. Our brains had the luxury to develop complex language, intricate social structures, and abstract art. The dog stood guard so the human could think. The dog tracked the game so the human could build. In a very real evolutionary sense, the dog helped invent human civilization. Think about the sheer impossibility of this alliance. We are primates. We are visual, tool-using, upright apes that evolved in the sun-drenched canopies of Africa. They are carnivores. They are olfactory, pack-hunting curs that evolved on the frozen plains of Eurasia. We operate on entirely different sensory wavelengths. We speak different biological languages. Under any normal rules of ecology, we should have been bitter competitors. We should have fought each other for the same prey until one of us was driven to extinction. But instead, we looked across the chasm of our differences, across the firelight of a freezing Ice Age night, and we struck a bargain. The terms of that ancient contract were simple. I will feed you, and you will protect me. I will offer you the warmth of my fire, and you will give me the sharpness of your teeth. I will be the hands, and you will be the nose. Over 30,000 years, that utilitarian contract deepened into something far more profound. It became a bond of mutual affection, a shared emotional language built on oxytocin and empathy. It survived the melting of the glaciers. It survived the invention of agriculture. It survived the rise and fall of Rome, the devastation of plagues, the horrors of global wars, and the relentless march of the industrial age. No other relationship in the history of biology has endured so much change and remained so fundamentally intact. So, the next time you are sitting on your couch and your dog comes over, rests its head on your knee and looks up at you with those deep, expressive eyes, take a moment to truly appreciate what you are looking at. You are not just looking at a pet. You are looking at a living, breathing time machine. You are looking at a creature whose ancestors walked alongside yours across the Bering land bridge. You are looking at a predator that chose to lay down its wildness because it found something it valued more in the company of humans. You are looking at the only animal in the history of the earth that has successfully bridged the infinite gap between the wilderness and the hearth. Every time you throw a ball, every time you fill a food bowl, every time you reach down to scratch that spot just behind their ears, you are honoring a 30,000-year-old promise. You are participating in an unbroken chain of love and survival that stretches back to the very dawn of our humanity. The story of the first dogs is not just a chapter in our history. It is the mirror in which we can see our best selves. They taught us how to care